The woman's breath came in ragged gasps as she pulled herself into the freight car, her fingers numb from the biting cold and her lungs burning with each desperate inhale of the October air. Florence Jackson pressed herself against the wooden slats inside the car, listening for any sign that someone had spotted her boarding the westbound train as it pulled away from the Kansas City depot in 1882. The winter was coming early this year, and she needed to be far away before the first snow fell, before anyone could trace her steps back through the frost. Her past chased her like wolves after wounded prey, and she had nothing left but the clothes on her back and a heart so broken she wondered if it would ever beat normally again. The train lurched forward with a grinding squeal of metal on metal, and Florence stumbled, catching herself against a stack of crates that smelled of pine and tobacco. Her fingers were bleeding where she had gripped the icy ladder to pull herself aboard, and her dress was torn at the hem from running through the rail yard. She was 22 years old, and she felt ancient. The bruises on her arms had finally started to fade from purple to yellow, but the ones on her soul remained as dark as ever. She had run from her uncle's house in the dead of night 3 weeks ago, and she had been running ever since, working odd jobs for meals, sleeping in barns and abandoned buildings, always moving west, always looking over her shoulder. The freight car was half full of cargo, giving her places to hide among the wooden boxes and burlap sacks. She found a corner near the back and wedged herself between 2 large crates, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. The temperature was dropping as the sun began to set, and she knew the night would be brutal without proper shelter. But she had survived worse. She had survived her parents dying of fever when she was 16. She had survived being sent to live with her uncle, a cruel man who saw her as nothing more than unpaid labor and something worse when he had been drinking. She had survived his rage when she refused his advances, and she had survived running with nothing but the coins she had stolen from his desk drawer. The rhythmic clacking of the wheels against the tracks became a kind of music, a lullaby that spoke of distance and escape. Florence closed her eyes and let herself drift, her body exhausted beyond measure. She did not know where this train was headed, only that it was going west, and west was where she needed to be. West was where people could reinvent themselves, where the past did not matter as much as what you could do with your hands and your will. West was freedom, or at least the promise of it. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, the door of the freight car was sliding open with a loud bang that echoed through the space. Florence's eyes flew open, her heart hammering against her ribs as cold air and fading daylight flooded in. A man's silhouette filled the doorway, broad-shouldered and tall, backlit by the orange sky of sunset. "Well, I'll be damned," a male voice said, not unkind but surprised. "Got ourselves a stowaway." Florence scrambled to her feet, her back pressed against the wall of the car, ready to run though there was nowhere to go. The train was still moving, the landscape rushing by in a blur of prairie grass and rolling hills. The man stepped inside, and she could see him better now. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell across his forehead beneath a worn hat. He wore the rough clothing of a railroad worker, sturdy canvas pants and a thick coat against the cold, and there was a leather tool belt around his waist. His eyes were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the prairie, and they studied her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Easy now," he said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I am not going to hurt you. I am Lucas Finnegan, brakeman on this line. Part of my job is checking the freight cars. Did not expect to find anyone in this one." Florence's throat was tight with fear and thirst. She had not had water since that morning when she had filled her canteen at a public pump in the last town. "Please," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "Please do not turn me in. I will get off at the next stop. I just need to get further west." Lucas Finnegan studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her bleeding hands, the desperate look in her green eyes. She was beautiful despite her disheveled state, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and freckles scattered across her pale cheeks. But more than her beauty, it was the haunted look in her eyes that made him pause. He had seen that look before, on soldiers returning from war, on women fleeing bad situations. It was the look of someone who had been hurt and was still running from the pain. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Anywhere," Florence said honestly. "Anywhere but where I came from." Lucas glanced back at the open door, then at the woman before him. He should report her. Railroad policy was clear about stowaways, but policy did not account for the way his chest tightened when he looked at her, or the protective instinct that surged through him. He had always been a sucker for lost causes, his mother used to say. It was why he had given his last dollar to beggars and brought home stray dogs as a boy. "This train is headed to Colorado," he said finally. "We will be stopping in Florissant for water and coal." "Small town in Teller County up in the mountains. If you stay quiet and stay hidden, I will not report you. But you need to understand, if the conductor finds you, there is nothing I can do." Relief flooded through Florence so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Lucas stepped closer, pulling a canteen from his belt. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "You look half dead from thirst." Florence took the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply, the water cool and clean and the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. When she finally lowered it, she saw that Lucas was still watching her with that same concerned expression. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday," she admitted. "I had some bread I bought in the last town, but it is gone now." Lucas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. "It is just biscuits and some dried beef," he said, handing it to her. "Not fancy, but it will keep you going." Florence wanted to cry at his kindness, but she held the tears back through sheer force of will. She had cried enough in the past weeks to last a lifetime. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "No need for thanks," Lucas said, waving off her gratitude. "Just stay quiet and stay hidden. I will be back to check on you before we reach Florissant. That will be sometime tomorrow morning. We have got a long night ahead." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, looking back at her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Florence," she said softly. "Florence Jackson." "Well, Florence Jackson, try to stay warm. It is going to get cold tonight." "Those blankets over there," he pointed to a stack near the front of the car. "They are being shipped to a mercantile in Florissant, but I do not think anyone will mind if you borrow one for the journey." With that, he slid the door partly closed, leaving just enough of an opening for air but blocking the worst of the wind. Florence stood in the dimming light, clutching the food he had given her, and felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. She made her way to the stack of blankets and took one from the middle where it would not be noticed, then returned to her corner and wrapped herself in its rough warmth. The biscuits were hard and the dried beef was salty, but it was food and she ate slowly, savoring every bite. As darkness fell completely and the temperature dropped, she could see her breath in the air. The train rocked and swayed as it climbed into higher elevations, and through the gap in the door, she could see stars beginning to appear in the vast black sky. Florence thought about Lucas Finnegan and his unexpected kindness. In her experience, men were either indifferent or cruel, but there had been genuine concern in his eyes. She wondered what his story was, why he was working as a brakeman on a freight train, instead of settling down somewhere with a wife and family. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and capable hands. The kind of man who looked like he could handle whatever challenges the frontier threw at him. She pulled the blanket tighter and tried to sleep, but her mind was too active, cycling through memories she wished she could forget. Her uncle's angry face when she had refused him. The sound of glass breaking when he had thrown his whiskey bottle at the wall. The way he had grabbed her arm so hard she thought he might break it, telling her she was ungrateful, that she owed him everything, that she belonged to him to do with as he pleased. She had waited until he passed out drunk that night, then taken what little money she could find and run. She had been running ever since, and she was tired. So very tired. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, Florence jerked awake to the sound of the freight car door sliding open again. Her heart hammered with panic until she saw Lucas's familiar silhouette. "Just me," he said quietly. "Doing my rounds. How are you holding up?" "Cold," Florence admitted, her teeth chattering despite the blanket, "but alive." Lucas disappeared for a moment, then returned with another blanket. "Here," he said, draping it over her shoulders. "The temperature has dropped below freezing. We are getting up into the mountains now." "Will not someone notice these blankets are missing?" Florence asked. "I will take them from my own quarters," Lucas said. "No one will notice." He sat down on a crate across from her, and in the moonlight filtering through the door gap, Florence could see his face more clearly. There was a scar along his jawline, pale against his tanned skin, and his eyes held a weariness that matched her own. "Can I ask what you are running from?" he said gently. "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to." Florence was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share. But something about the darkness and the isolation of their situation made her want to talk, to unburden herself to this stranger who had shown her such unexpected compassion. "My uncle," she said finally. "After my parents died, I had nowhere else to go. He took me in, but he was not a good man. He drank, and when he drank, he got mean. And then he wanted things from me that no uncle should want from his niece. When I refused, he got angry, so I ran." Lucas's jaw tightened, and even in the dim light, Florence could see the anger flash in his eyes. "He hurt you," he tried, Florence said. "I got away before he could do worse than bruises. But if I stayed, eventually he would have succeeded. So I left with nothing but the clothes on my back and what little money I could steal from him." "That is not stealing," Lucas said firmly. "That is taking what you need to survive. No one should have to endure what you described." "The law might see it differently," Florence said with a bitter laugh. "I am sure he has told everyone I am a thief and a runaway. If he finds me, he will drag me back, and next time I will not be able to escape." "Then we will make sure he does not find you," Lucas said with such conviction that Florence felt tears prick at her eyes again. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You do not know me. I could be lying about everything." Lucas was quiet for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. "A few years back," he said slowly, "my sister ran away from home. She was 18, and our father had arranged a marriage for her to a man who was known for beating his first wife. My sister begged him not to make her marry this man, but my father would not listen. He cared more about the business alliance than his own daughter's safety. So she ran. We never found out what happened to her. She just disappeared, and we have not heard from her since. I like to think that someone, somewhere, helped her when she needed it. That someone showed her kindness when she was desperate and alone. So when I see someone in need, I help if I can. Maybe it is my way of paying back the kindness I hope my sister received." "I am so sorry," Florence said softly. "I hope she found safety and happiness." "So do I," Lucas said. "Every day I hope that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the train rocking beneath them, the cold air making their breath visible in the moonlight. Florence found herself studying Lucas's face, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he gave a slight smile. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy. In a world that had shown her so much cruelty, he was a bright spot of decency. "What will you do when you reach Florissant?" Lucas asked. "I do not know," Florence admitted. "Fine work, I suppose. I can clean, cook, mend clothes. I am good with figures, too. My father taught me before he died, but I do not have references or connections. It will not be easy." "Florissant is a small town," Lucas said thoughtfully. "Gold and silver mining brought people there, but it is not as wild as some mining towns. There is a hotel that might need help, and the general store sometimes hires. My family has a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. We raise cattle and horses. My mother passed 2 years ago, so it is just me and my father now, and he is not getting any younger. We could use help around the place if you are interested." Florence's heart skipped a beat. "You are offering me work." "I am offering you a chance," Lucas said. "The work is hard and the pay is modest, but you would have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day. And more importantly, you would be safe. My father is a good man, fair and honest. He would not tolerate anyone mistreating you. Why would you do this for me?" Florence asked, almost afraid to believe what she was hearing. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," Lucas said simply. "And because I can see that you are a good person who has been dealt a bad hand. Let me help you, Florence." The way he said her name, so gentle and sincere, made something warm bloom in her chest. "Yes," she said. "Yes, thank you. I will work hard, I promise. You will not regret this." "I do not think I will," Lucas said with a smile. "Now try to get some rest. We will be arriving in Florissant around mid-morning. I will come get you before we pull into the station." He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. "Florence?" "Yes, things are going to get better. I know it does not feel like it now, but they will. You are stronger than you know." After he left, Florence wrapped both blankets around herself and lay down on the floor of the freight car. Despite the cold and the hardness of the wooden planks beneath her, she felt lighter than she had in months. She had a destination now, a purpose. And more than that, she had met someone who saw her not as a victim or a burden, but as a person worthy of help and respect. As the train climbed higher into the Colorado mountains, Florence finally slept, and for the first time in weeks, her dreams were not haunted by her uncle's angry face or grasping hands. Instead, she dreamed of mountains and fresh starts, of a ranch under wide blue skies, and of gray-blue eyes that looked at her with kindness. Morning came slowly, the darkness giving way to the soft gray light of pre-dawn. Florence woke stiff and cold, but more rested than she had been since starting her journey. She could see through the gap in the door that the landscape had changed dramatically overnight. They were in the mountains now, surrounded by tall pines and rocky outcroppings, the peaks dusted with early snow that glowed pink in the rising sun. The air was thinner here, crisp and clean and smelling of pine sap and wood smoke. She was carefully folding the blankets when Lucas returned, sliding the door open wider to let in the morning light. He had a bundle with him that he handed to her. "Fresh clothes," he said. "They were my sister's. My father could not bring himself to get rid of them after she left. They have been packed away in a trunk all this time. I think she would want someone to get use out of them." Florence took the bundle with trembling hands and found a simple but well-made dress of dark blue wool, along with a warmer coat, stockings, and even a pair of sturdy boots. "I cannot take these," she protested weakly. "Yes, you can," Lucas said firmly. "You cannot start a new life wearing torn clothes and bleeding through your shoes, Besides, like I said, I think my sister would approve. Change quickly. We will be pulling into Florissant in about an hour, and you should look presentable when we arrive." He turned his back to give her privacy, and Florence quickly stripped off her ruined dress and changed into the new clothes. Everything fit reasonably well. Lucas's sister must have been about her size. The dress was warm and clean, and the boots were the most wonderful thing she had felt on her feet in weeks. When she was dressed, she touched Lucas's shoulder to let him know she was done. He turned and his eyes widened slightly. "You look like a different person," he said. "A proper young lady." Florence felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "No repayment needed," Lucas said. "Just work hard and be kind, and that will be payment enough. Now, let me explain how this is going to work. When we pull into the station, I will need to help with unloading and other duties. But after that, I will take you to meet my father. His name is Florence Finnegan. He is gruff, but he has a good heart. If I vouch for you, he will give you a chance." "What should I tell him about how I came to be here?" Florence asked nervously. "The truth, mostly," Lucas said. "That you were running from a bad situation and looking for a fresh start. You do not need to go into all the details unless you want to. My father does not pry into people's pasts. He is more interested in what you can do and who you are now." The train began to slow, the brakes squealing as they approached the Florissant station. Florence's heart hammered with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was it, the beginning of her new life if everything went according to plan. "Stay hidden until I come back for you," Lucas instructed. "Once the cargo is unloaded and the other workers have dispersed, I will get you out safely." Florence nodded, retreating back to her corner and watching through the gap as the train finally ground to a halt. She could hear voices outside, men calling to each other, the sound of the freight car doors being opened one by one. When her car's door was opened, Lucas was there, directing the workers to the specific crates that needed to be removed. He did not look in her direction, but she could see the slight tension in his shoulders that told her he was aware of her presence. The unloading took nearly an hour. Florence watched as crates and barrels were hauled out onto the platform, where men with wagons waited to transport them to various businesses around town. Through the open door, she caught glimpses of Florissant. It was indeed a small town, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, some painted and some bare lumber weathered gray by wind and sun. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks white with snow, and the air that drifted into the freight car was so cold and clean it almost hurt to breathe. Finally, the activity died down. Lucas appeared at the door and beckoned to her. "Come on," he said quietly. "Most everyone has gone to the saloon for lunch. We can slip away now." Florence climbed down from the freight car, her new boots crunching on the gravel of the rail yard. Her legs were shaky from sitting for so long, and Lucas steadied her with a hand on her elbow. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she looked up at him in surprise. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, something passed between them, something electric and unspoken. "This way," he said, his voice slightly rough. He led her around the back of the station, avoiding the main street. "The ranch is about 5 miles northwest of town. We will take my horse. I keep him stabled at the livery when I am working." The livery was a large barn at the edge of town, and inside, Florence was hit with the warm smell of hay and horses. Lucas led her to a stall where a handsome bay gelding stood munching contentedly on oats. "This is Copper," Lucas said, patting the horse's neck affectionately. "He is steady and reliable, just like his owner." Florence laughed at that, the first genuine laugh she had felt in months. "Are you calling yourself steady and reliable?" "I am," Lucas said with a grin. Is that not what every woman wants? There was a teasing note in his voice that made Florence's heart flutter. She was not used to this easy banter, this lightness. It felt good, like stretching muscles that had been cramped for too long. Lucas saddled Copper efficiently, then led the horse out of the barn. He mounted first, then reached down to help Florence up behind him. She hesitated for just a moment, then took his hand and let him pull her up. She settled onto the horse behind the saddle, and Lucas showed her where to hold on to his waist. "Ready?" he asked over his shoulder. "Ready," Florence said, though her heart was racing, and she was not sure if it was from nervousness about meeting his father or from the proximity to Lucas, the feel of his solid warmth beneath her hands. They rode out of town at an easy pace, following a well-worn trail that wound through pine forests and across open meadows. The November air was cold but not unbearable, and the sun was bright overhead in a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Florence had never seen country like this. She had grown up in the flat farmlands of Missouri, and the mountains here were breathtaking, all purple shadows and white peaks and vast expanses of wilderness. "It is beautiful," she said, raising her voice to be heard over the sound of Copper's hooves. "It is," Lucas agreed. "I traveled around quite a bit after I left home, worked on railroads in Wyoming and Kansas, but I always came back here. There is something about these mountains that gets into your blood." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the rhythmic thud of hoofbeats. Florence found herself relaxing against Lucas's back, feeling safe for the first time in so long. The past weeks of running and hiding and fear began to feel like a distant nightmare. After about an hour they crested a ridge, and Lucas pointed to a valley below. "There," he said, "that is home." Florence looked down and saw a ranch spread out in the valley, nestled against the mountainside. There was a main house built of logs and stone, smoke rising from its chimney, and several outbuildings including a large barn, a stable, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and horses ran in a corral near the barn. It was a working ranch, not fancy but solid and well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and pride of ownership. "It is wonderful," Florence breathed. "My grandfather built the main house with his own hands," Lucas said with obvious pride. "He came out here in 1859 during the Pikes Peak gold rush, but he decided ranching was a surer bet than mining. He was right. We have been here ever since." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the house, the front door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall like Lucas, but older, perhaps in his early 50s, with silver-shot dark hair and a lined face that spoke of years spent working outdoors. He wore work clothes and boots, and there was a rifle leaning against the wall near the door, as if he had grabbed it when he heard the horse approaching. "Lucas," the man called out, shading his eyes with his hand. "That you, son?" "It is me, Pa," Lucas called back. He rode up to the house and dismounted, then helped Florence down. She felt suddenly nervous, standing there under the scrutiny of Lucas Finnegan's sharp blue eyes. "Pa, this is Florence Jackson," Lucas said, his hand on Florence's shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and reassuring. "She needs help, and I thought we might be able to offer her work here on the ranch." Lawrence's eyes moved from Lucas to Florence, taking in her appearance with a rancher's assessing gaze. "Does she now?" he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "And how did you come to meet Miss Jackson?" "She was hiding in one of the freight cars," Lucas said honestly. "Running from a bad situation. I offered to help her find a fresh start." Lawrence was quiet for a long moment, and Florence felt her stomach twist with nervousness. This man had every right to turn her away, to tell his son he was a fool for bringing home a stray. But then Lawrence's face softened slightly, and he nodded. "Well, come on inside then," he said. "It is too cold to be standing out here talking. We can discuss this over coffee." The inside of the house was warm and welcoming, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall of the main room and comfortable, if worn, furniture arranged around it. The kitchen was at the back, with a large table that could seat 8 or more, and there were doorways leading to what Florence assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean but had the slightly dusty, neglected look of a house without a woman's touch. Lawrence poured coffee from a pot on the stove and gestured for them to sit at the kitchen table. Florence wrapped her hands around the warm mug gratefully, letting the heat seep into her fingers. "So," Lawrence said, settling into a chair across from her, "tell me your story, Miss Jackson. And I want the truth, understand. I have no patience for liars." Florence took a deep breath and began to talk. She told him about her parents dying, about going to live with her uncle, about his cruelty and his unwanted advances. She told him about running, about the weeks of traveling west, about hiding in the freight car. She did not spare herself or make excuses, and she did not ask for pity. She just told the truth, and when she was done, she met Lawrence's eyes squarely, waiting for his judgment. Lawrence was quiet for a long time, sipping his coffee and studying her with those sharp blue eyes. Finally, he set down his mug and nodded. "That takes courage," he said simply. "Running like you did with nothing and no one to help you. Most people would have just given in, accepted their fate. But you did not. That tells me something about your character." "I can work hard," Florence said earnestly. "I am not afraid of long hours or difficult tasks. I will earn my keep, I promise." "I believe you," Lawrence said, "and Lord knows we could use help around here. Since my wife passed, this place has gotten away from me a bit. Lucas helps when he can, but he is gone most of the time working the railroad. I hired a hand who comes in during the day to help with the cattle and horses, but the house needs attention, and I am not much good at cooking or cleaning." Hope flared in Florence's chest. "I can cook and clean," she said. "My mother taught me well before she died, and I am good with mending and other household tasks." "Then here is what I propose," Lawrence said. "You work for us, keeping the house and cooking meals. In return, you get room and board and a small wage. We have got a room off the kitchen that used to be the housekeeper's quarters when my mother was alive. It is not big, but it is private and warm. You will work 6 days a week, and Sundays are your own to do as you please. If it does not work out, either of us can end the arrangement with a week's notice. Does that sound fair?" "More than fair," Florence said, hardly able to believe her luck. "Thank you, Mr. Finnegan. You will not regret this, I swear." "Call me Lawrence," he said with a slight smile. "Mr. Finnegan was my father, and he has been dead for 10 years. Now, let me show you your room, and then Lucas can help bring in some wood while you start thinking about dinner. I have not had a decent meal in so long I have forgotten what one tastes like." The room Lawrence showed her was small but perfect. It had a narrow bed with a thick quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the mountains. There was even a small stove in the corner for heat. To Florence, who had been sleeping on the ground and in freight cars, it was a palace. "I will give you a few minutes to settle in," Lawrence said. "Washroom is through that door there, and you are welcome to draw yourself a bath if you want. We have got a good well, so water is not a problem." After he left, Florence sat on the edge of the bed and let the reality of her situation wash over her. She was safe. She had a job, a room, people who were willing to give her a chance. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude, not fear and despair. She allowed herself only a few minutes of emotion before she stood and washed her face in the basin. There was work to be done, and she was eager to prove herself. She found an apron hanging on a hook by the door and tied it around her waist, then headed to the kitchen to see what provisions were available. The pantry was reasonably well stocked with basics like flour, beans, salt pork, and canned goods. There were potatoes and onions in bins, and she found eggs in the cold cellar. It was nothing fancy, but she could work with it. She had learned early how to make simple ingredients into satisfying meals. She was in the middle of peeling potatoes when Lucas came in with an armload of firewood. He stacked it neatly by the stove, then turned to her with a smile. "Settling in?" he asked. "I am," Florence said. "Your father is very kind. You both are." "He likes you," Lucas said. "I can tell. He would not have offered you the job if he did not think you would work out." "My father is a good judge of character." "What about you?" Florence asked, the question coming out before she could stop herself. "Do you think I will work out?" Lucas's smile widened. "I think you are going to do just fine, Florence Jackson. More than fine." There was something in his eyes when he looked at her that made her pulse quicken. She told herself not to read too much into it, not to let herself hope for something beyond kindness from a good man. But it was hard not to feel the pull between them, the spark that seemed to ignite whenever they were near each other. Over the next several weeks, Florence threw herself into her work with determination and purpose. She woke before dawn each day to start the stove and prepare breakfast. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows and beating rugs until every surface gleamed. She cooked hearty meals that had Lawrence praising her skills and even licking his plate when he thought she was not looking. She mended clothes and organized the pantry and turned the neglected house back into a home. Lawrence was as good as his word, treating her with respect and fairness. He was a man of few words, but the words he spoke were always honest and kind. He told her stories about his late wife, Mary, and about the early days of the ranch. He taught her about the cattle and horses, explaining the business side of ranching in a way that made her feel like her opinions mattered. But it was Lucas who occupied most of her thoughts. He came home every 8 or 9 days, when his rotation on the railroad gave him time off. And every time Florence saw him riding up the valley trail, her heart would leap in a way that both excited and terrified her. They would talk for hours, sitting by the fire after Lawrence had gone to bed, sharing stories about their lives and dreams and fears. Lucas told her about his travels, about the towns he had seen and the people he had met. He told her about his sister and the guilt he carried for not being able to help her. Florence told him about her parents and the happy childhood she had before they died, about her love of reading and how she dreamed of someday having her own library. The attraction between them grew with each visit, until it was almost painful. There were moments when their hands would brush passing a dish at dinner, or when their eyes would meet across a room, and the air would seem to crackle with electricity. But neither of them acted on it. Florence was afraid to presume, afraid that she was reading too much into his kindness. And Lucas seemed to be holding himself back, as if he was worried about scaring her or taking advantage of her vulnerable position. Winter came in earnest in December, with snow piling up in drifts and temperatures dropping so low that the water in the basin would sometimes freeze overnight. But the house was warm, and Florence had never felt more content. She was safe, she was fed, and she was beginning to believe that she might actually have a future here. It was a few days before Christmas when everything changed. Lucas had come home for a week's break, and the three of them were sitting around the fire after dinner, drinking coffee and talking about plans for the holiday. Lawrence announced that he was going into Florissant the next day to pick up supplies and invited Florence to come along to shop for Christmas dinner ingredients. "I will stay here and take care of the animals," Lucas said. But Florence, make sure Pa buys you something nice for Christmas. You have been working so hard, you deserve a treat. I do not need anything, Florence protested, but Lawrence waved off her objection. Nonsense, he said. You have turned this house into a home again. The least we can do is get you a proper Christmas gift. That night, Florence could not sleep. She lay in her bed, listening to the wind howl outside and thinking about how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She thought about Lucas and the way her heart raced when he was near. She thought about the fact that she was developing feelings for him that went far beyond gratitude. Feelings that were dangerous and foolish and completely beyond her control. She must have finally drifted off because the next thing she knew, someone was pounding on her door and Lawrence was shouting her name. She jumped out of bed, her heart hammering, and threw on her robe. "What is wrong?" she called, opening the door. Lawrence's face was pale in the lamplight. "It is Lucas," he said. "He went out to check on the horses a while ago and never came back. I just went to look for him and found him unconscious in the barn. I think one of the horses kicked him." Florence did not remember running to the barn, but suddenly she was there, kneeling in the hay next to Lucas's still form. His face was pale, and there was blood on his temple where his head had struck something when he fell. Lawrence had covered him with a blanket, and his breathing was shallow but steady. "We need to get him to the house," Florence said, her voice surprisingly calm despite the panic surging through her. "He will freeze out here." Together, they managed to get Lucas up and half carried, half dragged him to the house. They laid him on the sofa near the fire, and Florence immediately went to work, cleaning the wound on his head and checking for other injuries. She found a large bruise forming on his ribs where the horse had apparently kicked him, but nothing seemed to be broken. "Should I ride for the doctor?" Lawrence asked, his voice tight with worry. "Not yet," Florence said. "The storm is too bad and he is stable for now. If he does not wake up by morning, you can go. But right now, I think he just needs to rest and warm up." She stayed by Lucas's side all night, changing the cold compress on his head and watching his breathing. Lawrence sat in a chair nearby, dozing fitfully. Every time Lucas stirred or made a sound, Florence would lean forward, hoping he was waking, but he remained unconscious. It was near dawn when Lucas's eyes finally fluttered open. He looked confused for a moment, then winced in pain. "What happened?" he mumbled. "You got kicked by a horse," Florence said, relief flooding through her so intensely she felt dizzy. "Do you remember, sort of?" Lucas said, trying to sit up and immediately falling back with a groan. "God, my head feels like it is splitting open." "You have a concussion," Florence said firmly, pushing him back down when he tried to rise again. "You need to stay still and rest." "Yes, madam," Lucas said with a weak smile. His eyes focused on her face and something shifted in his expression. "You have been here all night, have you not?" "Taking care of me." "Of course," Florence said softly. "Where else would I be?" Lucas reached up and took her hand, his fingers warm despite his ordeal. "Florence," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I need to tell you something. I have been wanting to say it for weeks, but I was afraid. Afraid you would think I was taking advantage, or that it was too soon, or that I was an idiot. But lying in that barn, thinking I might die, all I could think about was how much I would regret not telling you." Florence's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over the sound of it. "Tell me what?" "That I am falling in love with you," Lucas said simply. "Hell, I think I have been falling since the moment I found you in that freight car. You are brave and strong and kind, and when I am around you, I feel like I am the man I always wanted to be. I know I am just a railroad brakeman with not much to offer, and you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you. Life is too short and too uncertain not to say what is in your heart." Tears were streaming down Florence's face, but she was smiling. "You are not an idiot," she said through her tears. "And you have everything to offer. You saved my life, Lucas, not just by helping me on the train, but by giving me a reason to believe that good people exist in the world, and I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since that first night when you gave me food and blankets and treated me like I mattered." Lucas pulled her down gently, mindful of his injuries, and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and tasted of tears and hope and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, Lawrence was standing in the doorway with a cup of coffee, a smile on his weathered face. "About time you two figured that out," he said gruffly. "I have been watching you dance around each other for weeks. Now, Lucas, you rest up and heal. And Florence, come have some breakfast. You have been up all night." The next few days passed in a blur of tending to Lucas and preparing for Christmas. The storm had dumped nearly 2 feet of snow, making travel impossible, but Florence did not mind. She was happier than she had ever been, caring for the man she loved and planning their first Christmas together. Lucas healed quickly, though Florence made him rest more than he wanted to. They spent hours talking about the future, about their dreams and plans. Lucas confessed that he was tired of working the railroad and wanted to settle down on the ranch full-time. Lawrence was thrilled with the idea, saying that he was getting too old to run the place alone and had been worried about what would happen to it when he could no longer work. On Christmas morning, they exchanged simple gifts. Florence gave Lawrence a new set of work gloves she had sewn from leather scraps, and gave Lucas a scarf she had knitted in the evenings by the fire. Lawrence gave her a beautiful shawl he had bought in town weeks earlier, and Lucas gave her a book of poetry he had ordered from a catalog. But the best gift came after breakfast, when Lucas got down on one knee in front of the Christmas tree, a simple gold band in his hand. "Florence Jackson," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know we have not known each other long, but sometimes you just know when something is right. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you have made me. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Florence said, not even needing to think about it. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in February in a simple ceremony at the small church in Florissant. Florence wore a dress that had belonged to Lucas's mother, altered to fit her, and carried a bouquet of dried flowers since nothing was blooming yet in the mountain winter. Lawrence stood up as witness, along with a few of the ranch hands and neighbors who had become friends over the past months. It was nothing fancy, but it was perfect. Their first year of marriage was not easy. They faced challenges that would have broken a weaker couple. There was a harsh late spring blizzard that killed several cattle. There was a problem with wolves getting into the livestock. There was the hard work of learning to live together, to compromise and communicate and build a life as partners. But through it all, their love deepened and grew. Lucas quit the railroad and focused on building up the ranch. Florence continued to run the household and also took over the business accounts, her skill with figures proving invaluable. Lawrence seemed to grow younger with his son home full-time, and he often said that having Florence there was like getting his beloved Mary back. In the fall of their first year of marriage, Florence discovered she was pregnant. The baby was born the following summer, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Thomas Lawrence Finnegan, after Lucas's grandfather and father. Lawrence held his grandson with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, and Florence knew that this was what family was supposed to be. Love and support and generations connected. 2 years later, a second child came, a daughter they named Mary Rose after both grandmothers. And 3 years after that, another son they called James. The house that had once felt empty and sad was filled with laughter and noise, and the beautiful chaos of children growing up loved and secure. Lucas proved to be as steady and reliable as he had claimed that first day in the livery, and also far more romantic than Florence had expected. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows and wrote her love notes that he hid in her sewing basket. He would dance with her in the kitchen while dinner cooked and tell her every day how much he loved her. He was a devoted father, patient and playful with the children, teaching them to ride and to care for the animals and to appreciate the beauty of the mountains around them. Lawrence lived to see all 3 grandchildren born and to watch the ranch prosper under Lucas's management. He passed away peacefully in his sleep when he was 62, and they buried him next to Mary on a hillside overlooking the valley. It was a sad time, but Florence was grateful that he had lived to see his family happy and thriving. The railroad brought news occasionally of Florence's uncle. He had fallen on hard times, his drinking worsening until he lost his business and his home. He died when Florence had been at the ranch for 5 years, and though she felt no joy at the news, she felt a sense of closure. The man who had tried to destroy her was gone, and she had not just survived but thrived. Over the years, Florence often thought back to that desperate night when she had climbed into the freight car, running from winter and her past with nothing but hope and determination. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to letting fear win. And she was eternally grateful that she had found the courage to keep going, because that courage had led her to Lucas. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised her with a trip to Denver. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch in years, leaving the children with a trusted neighbor. They stayed in a fancy hotel and ate in restaurants, and attended a play at the theater. But the best part was lying in bed in their hotel room, talking late into the night like they used to when they were first falling in love. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked, his arm around her as she rested her head on his chest. "Giving up the possibility of a different life may be an easier one." "Never," Florence said firmly. "Not for one single moment. You gave me everything I ever wanted, Lucas. A home, a family, love. You saw me when I was broken and lost, and you helped me find myself again. How could I ever regret that?" "I am the lucky one," Lucas said, kissing the top of her head. "I found a treasure hiding in a freight car, and I was smart enough not to let her get away." They returned to the ranch the next week to find that Thomas, now 19, and looking more like his father every day, had managed everything perfectly in their absence. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's head for business, and it was clear he would take over the ranch someday. Mary Rose, at 17, was beautiful and spirited, with suitors coming around despite Lucas's stern warnings. And James, at 14, was still figuring out who he wanted to be, but he had his parents' kind heart and strong values. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. Thomas married a schoolteacher from Florissant and gave them 3 grandchildren. Mary Rose surprised everyone by moving to Colorado Springs to become a nurse, determined to help people and make her own way in the world. James discovered a talent for training horses and built up that side of the ranch business until they were known throughout the territory for their quality stock. Lucas and Florence grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands and talking about their day. Lucas's hair turned silver, and Florence's auburn locks faded to white, but to each other, they were still the young people who had found each other on a train all those years ago. On the morning of Florence's 65th birthday, she woke to find Lucas already awake, watching her with those gray-blue eyes that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Good morning, beautiful," he said softly. "Good morning yourself, handsome," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "I have been lying here thinking," Lucas said, "about that night I found you in the freight car. Do you know what I thought when I first saw you?" "What?" Florence asked, curious. "I thought, that is the woman I am going to marry," Lucas said with a smile. "I know it sounds crazy, but I felt it in my bones. Like I had been waiting my whole life to find you, and there you were, hiding among the cargo, scared and brave and absolutely beautiful." "That is crazy," Florence said, but she was smiling. "You did not even know me." "I knew enough," Lucas said. "I knew you were a survivor. I knew you had courage. I knew you needed help, and I knew I wanted to be the one to help you. And I was right. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made." "Marrying you was the best thing that ever happened to me," Florence said, emotion making her voice thick. "You saved me, Lucas. In every way a person can be saved." They held each other close, grateful for another day, another moment together. They had built a life beyond anything Florence could have imagined that cold November night when she climbed into a freight car running from her past. They had raised children and grandchildren. They had built a successful ranch. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. And through it all, they had loved each other with a depth and devotion that never wavered. As the sun rose higher, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose, Florence thought about the girl she had been, so scared and alone, with no idea what her future held. And she thought about the woman she had become, strong and confident and surrounded by love. It had not been an easy journey, but it had been worth every difficult step. Lucas had given her more than a job or a home. He had given her hope when she had none. He had seen her worth when she felt worthless. He had loved her unconditionally and helped her build a life beyond her wildest dreams. And she had given him the same in return, loving him with everything she had, standing by his side through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. They were partners in the truest sense of the word, and their love story, which had begun on a freight train fleeing winter and the past, had become a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked them to tell the story of how they met, Lucas and Florence would sit side by side and share the tale. They would talk about the freight train and the cold November night and the brakeman who offered kindness to a desperate stranger. They would talk about falling in love and building a life, and all the challenges they had overcome together. And the great-grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, captivated by this real-life love story that had played out in the mountains of Colorado all those years ago. They would ask questions and beg for more details, and Lucas and Florence would oblige, always ending the story the same way. "Love finds you when you least expect it," Florence would say, her hand still firmly clasped in Lucas's after more than 50 years of marriage. "And when it does, you hold on tight and never let go. The best things in life are worth fighting for," Lucas would add, "and your grandmother was worth fighting for every single day." They lived well into their 80s, passing away within months of each other, as if neither could bear to be without the other for long. They were buried side by side in the family plot on the hillside overlooking the valley, next to Lawrence and Mary, and the ranch they had built together continued to thrive for generations. The story of Florence and Lucas became a cherished part of the family history, passed down from parents to children, a reminder that even in the darkest times hope can be found. That kindness matters. That love can heal the deepest wounds. That sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, in Teller County near the little town of Florissant, the ranch still stands, a testament to two people who found each other on a cold November night in 1882 and built a love story for the ages. The freight trains still run through the valley, their whistles echoing off the mountains. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind is just right, you can almost imagine you hear the sound of laughter coming from the old ranch house. The sound of a family built on love, courage, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance at happiness. Florence Jackson had climbed onto that freight train running from winter in her past, broken and afraid and certain that her life was over. But what she found was not just safety or shelter or a job. What she found was a cowboy brakeman named Lucas Finnegan who saw her worth when she could not see it herself, who offered her not just help but hope, not just a roof over her head but a home, not just a future but a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. Their story was one of redemption and second chances, of finding love in unexpected places, and building something beautiful from the ashes of pain and loss. It was a reminder that the past does not have to define the future, that kindness can change lives, and that true love, when it comes, is worth every risk, every fear, every moment of doubt. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Lucas and Florence gave to each other and to the generations that came after them. The knowledge that no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. No matter how cold the winter, spring will follow. And no matter how broken you feel, love can make you whole again. They had lived there happily ever after, not because their life was perfect or easy, but because they faced every challenge together, their love growing stronger with each passing year. They had built a legacy not just of land and cattle and horses, but of love and family, and the kind of devotion that inspires songs and stories. The freight train that carried Florence Jackson west that November day had carried more than just a desperate woman fleeing her past. It had carried the future. It had carried hope. It had carried the beginning of a love story that would echo through the generations, a testament to the power of one moment of kindness, one decision to help a stranger, one choice to open your heart to love. And as the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, the ranch stood as it always had, solid and enduring, a monument to Florence and Lucas and the love they had built. The mountains watched over it as they always had, eternal and unchanging, witnesses to the countless small moments that had added up to a lifetime of love. It had become a love that transcended time, a family that would endure for generations, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single act of kindness on a cold November night. Florence and Lucas had found each other when they both needed it most. They had built a life together filled with love, laughter, challenges, and triumphs. They had raised children who embodied their values and carried on their legacy. And they had proven that true love, the kind that weathers all storms and grows stronger with time, is not just the stuff of fairy tales but something real and achievable and worth every sacrifice. Their story was complete, their happily ever after fully realized. From the freight train to the ranch, from strangers to soulmates, from broken and lost to whole and found, Florence and Lucas had lived a life that mattered. They had loved deeply, laughed often, worked hard, and left the world better than they found it. And as the stars came out over the Colorado mountains, shining down on the ranch that love had built, the wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying with it the echo of a promise kept, a love honored, and a story that would never be forgotten. The story of how a cowboy brakeman found a woman hiding from winter and her past on a freight train and offered her not just shelter, but a future. A future filled with love, hope, and the kind of happiness that comes from finding the person who makes you complete. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. It was a love story for the ages, set against the wild beauty of the American West, a testament to the enduring power of love to heal, transform, and redeem. And it was true, every word of it, from the first desperate climb into that freight car to the last peaceful breath taken in old age, surrounded by the family that love had created. Florence and Lucas Finnegan had lived, loved, and left a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love eternal. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than a life well lived, a love deeply felt, and a future secured not just for themselves but for all the generations to come? The freight train had carried Florence west toward an unknown future, but it had delivered her to exactly where she needed to be, to the person she was meant to find, to the love that would define the rest of her days. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.